I'm Rob. Thanks, Sue. I'm Robin Nicholson. I'm a fellow of Cullinan Studio, convener of The Edge, and chair of the Cambridge Equality Panel. As a child, I walked in a huge wood regularly and out the back of our house, and live looking at some of the mature plane trees and large limes on Highbury Fields. More recently, I've been fascinated by books about the interaction of trees and soil, such as Suzanne Simard's thrilling Finding the Mother Tree. This critical discussion is titled Trees and Subsidence, Understanding the Issues, Balancing the Solutions, Reducing Future Problems. Trees enjoy political patronage and huge popular enjoyment, with a wide recognition of their importance. Wait a minute, something's happened there. Sorry. Yeah, they are. Hold on. Sorry, something happened.
Excuse me, can you mute please? Right, whoever's talking. Keith, can you mute them?
Makes sense.
Okay, trees enjoy political patronage and huge popular.
Unmute, Robin. Unmute.
God. Wait, so how long have I been muted for?
No, 2 minutes, because I muted everybody.
Okay, we'll start again. Well, not again, but trees enjoy political patronage and huge popular enjoyment, with a wide recognition of their impact on our well-being. And yet they are regularly cut down as being a nuisance, most recently in the centre of Plymouth, or a perceived danger. Insurers such as the NHBC have rules that make it very difficult to plant a tree near a house they are warranting. Highways engineers do their best to outlaw them or demand advance funding for their maintenance. Last year, the Cambridge Equality Panel was shocked to be told in a design review session of a secondary school campus that it would not be possible to provide greater tree cover to cool the playgrounds, as the head of sport hated trees. But change is coming. Paragraph 131 of National Planning Policy Framework states, trees make an important contribution to the character and quality of urban environments and can also help mitigate and adapt to climate change. Elsewhere, it demands planning policies and decisions should ensure, which is strong words, I think, that new streets are tree-lined and that opportunities are taken to incorporate trees elsewhere in developments. The NHBC are on the move, and the Institution of Structural Engineers has published new guidance. Over the next 2 hours, a great lineup of speakers will explore the issues and seek a balanced approach to resolving current problems faced by a low-rise construction. So thanks to TDAG, Sue James and the iStructD for championing this event, and to Keith Soker for hosting it online. This is a workshop, so please make good use of the chat function that Sue will feed into the discussion with any urgent questions being taken after each presentation, and a more general discussion at the end. First up is Tim Farewell, who is geospatial environmental data scientist and a director of Mapelsky, or Maple Sky, not sure which. Tim.
All right. Thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen here, and it is indeed Maple Sky. So what we're going to be talking about today is subsidence and climate change, and really more of a focus on the climate change element. I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour through subsidence, but first of all, maybe an introduction to me and what we do at Maple Sky. So what we do is we help a range of organizations by providing them with maps and models, helping them to understand the risks today from the natural world, but also how those risks are going to change as we go into the future so that they can build more resilient assets, buildings, and so on. We've got a little bit of noise, so if you can mute yourself, if you're not muted yet, that would be lovely. Okay, subsidence is a really broad term, and in my various jobs over the years, we've looked at subsidence and people have defined it in different ways. And some people take a very broad terminology in any type of ground movement, whether it's from mines or peat shrinkage, they would claim this is subsidence. There's about 7 key movements, which are often lumped together. And we're just going to be focusing on one of those today, which is soil related, generally clay related subsidence. Peat shrinkage is another quite common one in the fens, sand washout, where fines can run out, mining, historic, and even more recent things. And we have soluble deposits at depth in the earth. These can all lead to the ground settling and causing issues for houses and infrastructure. But as I say, we're going to be really focusing on clay-related subsidence. So if you get in your head 3 overlapping circles in your traditional Venn diagram in terms of what causes subsidence, first of all, you need vulnerable structures, and I think John's going to go into that in a lot more detail than I will. Shrinkable soils and really hot and dry summers. Where you have these 3 things together, that's when you have real problems. And of course, trees, they don't begin with S, summers, structures, soils. So I've put down stems and sticks, but really I mean trees here. When you have trees, they can exacerbate the hot, dry summers that we're already having, or even cause some issues where you have vulnerable structures and shrinkable soils, even in not the hottest and driest summers. When we're looking at subsidence, I want you to think beyond just houses. So often we're looking at, subsidence as an insurance claim, but many of the same movements that are impacting houses also impact infrastructure. So a lot of my work is helping water companies understand pipe failure. That's a key thing, or local roads or local paths. Any of these linear infrastructure assets where it's going over soils which are moving can break and fail and cause problems. And there's huge hidden costs around soil-related ground movement, whether it's treating the water that's escaping or, legal penalties for underperformance or damage, if someone's going down a local road and they hurt themselves. So there's a whole range of costs which are borne as a result of these soil-related ground movements. Last year alone, I think there's £219 million worth of insurance claims just on houses. So these costs are not insignificant. I think last summer they were getting a new claim, every 4 a minute, something like that. It was bonkers, huge numbers of claims. This problem isn't going away, and it's going to become more serious, as we'll see. So we're just going to look through these issues one by one. So first of all, shrinkable soils. You've probably seen this when you're out walking, these massive cracks in the ground. How do these occur? Well, hopefully this will work. This is a demonstration with 3 dry soil samples that we have. The one in the middle is sand. And when we apply water to it, you can see it washing away. This one on the right-hand side is a sandy loam, so kind of a medial soil. It doesn't do much, but look at the clay loam here on the left-hand side. You can see it start to expand as it absorbs the water. And the same thing can happen, in reverse. This is really subsidence, where we're going into the summer, the soils start to dry out, and you can see those Lego bricks start to drop down. And this is a problem for houses, it's a problem for roads, it's a problem for pipes. When you have differential ground movement, when you have part of the ground moving more than the other, that's where we have real issues with pipes breaking or roads breaking or houses cracking. Hope that makes sense. So how do we help companies? Well, first of all, we look at maps and we go, okay, well, these soils here, can shrink a lot more than maybe these ones up here. And we can identify high risk areas like that. Just as an aside, some research I did when I was at Cranfield with a number of colleagues looking at failed roads or degraded roads in Lincolnshire. We mapped where these roads were failed, which are these black lines here, and then overlaid it on a soil map. And it was just fantastic to see how closely aligned failed roads were with these highly movable soils. So soils are critically important. All right. Second circle is the vulnerable structures. And as I say, John's really going to shed a lot more light on this than I will. But just to say, the type of houses we build are important. I think we do need to move away from pumping huge amounts of concrete into foundations, but now's not the time to go into that. But I just wanted to highlight, when you have an extension, let's say you have an old house with quite a shallow foundation, and you come along and you build quite a large, deep foundation according to modern guidance. part of the house, the old house, can happily go up and down as it has done for 100 years or so. And the new part of the foundation is really rock solid. So you get part of the house moving up, the other solid, you get cracking between those two things. So that's just one type of structural issue which can occur. The other thing I'd just like to say is trees don't always behave as perfectly as you would like. Roots can travel huge different distances in an urban landscape and can cause issues at quite a distance. Okay, so now we're coming on to the main part here, which is climate change and hot and dry summers. Okay, hopefully all of you are on board that the climate is changing. If not, look at this map and this graph and you will see that. Over time, the average temperature of the UK has increased. This was last year, right? So we had another record-breaking year, which resulted in huge costs and huge claims for a range of companies. So what I've done here is I've mapped the change from the 1890s through to the 2020s, and you can see it gradually warming over this time period. It doesn't actually look, hugely different. Let's compare two of them side by side, and you can see this is, relatively warmer compared to this. And the reason there's not massive changes in the color, despite seeing that line go up, is because it's going to get a lot worse. So if we're using the same scale, this is what the same map looks like by the time we get to the end of the century if we don't change our ways. My daughter was saying when she was looking at these slides last night, Daddy, you need to put on a really scared emoji here. And I couldn't find one that really was suitable, but imagine a scared emoji there because it is scary. So that's following this path. And what we do is we build models across a range of different scenarios because it is uncertain as to how well we're going to do at reducing our climate emissions. But here's just a flavor of some of the trajectories that we could go down. If we make severe changes to the way that we live our lives, what we eat, how we travel, like stopping international air travel as much as possible, or blocking up leaks in Turkmenistan, maybe we'll be able to constrain the warning to, only it's going to get worse, but not as terrible as it could have if we continue as we are, which is just truly catastrophic. But by the end of the century, almost despite what happens, we're going to see a couple changes. The north is going to get hotter, perhaps even than London is today. The southeast is going to continue to be a hot spot. But I think most people will be wishing their parents had taken climate change more seriously. Implications of this: there will be more and more subsidence claims. They're going to expand to new areas in the country. We're going to have more failed roads, more pipe failures, higher leakage levels. We're really not set up yet, across many industries for what is coming. So what do we got to do? 3 steps. If you're going to take any notes, do this. First of all, we need to start by identifying the areas which are at risk today. Because a lot of companies and organizations and councils don't even know where their risks are now. Start by identifying what's at risk now. Then we can help you identify how those risks are going to change as we go into the future. And then thirdly, we can look at things that we can each and collectively do to reduce that risk and reduce the risk associated with climate change. So we've only had 10 minutes. If you want to talk in more detail, scan the QR code and connect with me, and I will happily go into more detail about that with you at your leisure. But I hope that's a good introduction to this issue of subsidence and how it's going to get worse and expand to new areas as we go forward into the next decades of the century. Okay.
Thanks, Tim. That was absolutely brilliant at laying out the issues. Sue, have we got any questions that we can put to Tim?
Yeah, so we've got a technical question from Alexandra, Tim, which I think you might just reply to her separately because it's about the type of scenarios you're using. But the thing I picked up personally, I don't know how other people feel, is your 3 steps to lowering risk. And the one I think I'd be quite interested in any comments from you or from others is those, or one to hold for the bit wider discussion, is identifying the specific key interventions to reduce risk that we can all take. For me, that's the one that we all need to be putting our mind to. So do we hold that till the wider discussion, or?
Yeah, I can provide brief comment on it now, but I would,
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay, so actually I will deal with Alexandra's as well. So Alexandra, I can see your question there is about RCP scenarios. Okay, yes, I can update these models to, based on any model. The reality is, and that would be a great thing to do. Yes, let's do it. What I think the more pressing problem, what I'm seeing across a range of industries is that, okay, models aside, all the models are saying it's going to get hotter and drier. It's, summers are going to get hotter and drier. The winters are going to get warmer and wetter. Or we're going to have more extreme rainfall events, more extreme storms, and we're going to have sea level rise. All the models say that. So, and what I also see is most organizations, most regulators, and most governments are not nearly taking this seriously enough based on the existing evidence. So given that trajectory and the range, all the range of projections are going in the same direction, I think what's probably more important is that we encourage action based on, what we know now. And yes, of course, let's refine those as well. So hopefully that's helpful. Come back to me if not. Sue, your question about interventions that we can make now, I think there's so many things that we can do. And a lot of it is leading by example. And I think we're all crushed when we see methane leaks from Turkmenistan, huge amounts of methane being emitted. Those are outside of our control. And things that I know are more inside our control in terms of cutting carbon emissions. It's up to people to decide what they're willing to do. I think from our perspective as a family, we're trying to reduce the amount of flying we do, drive to maybe Switzerland or France for a holiday, and cut out high carbon foods from our diet. So there are things we can do personally, but I think a lot of it is political lobbying that we need to get our companies and our country on a lower carbon footing. So that's my rant over, and always happy to go into more detail as necessary.
Good to get your rant. Excellent. Next up is the civil engineer John Patch, who I've met many years ago when he was Roger Bullivant. He's now founding director of the construction and estate management consultancy Team Patch, and an honorary member of ASUC, which I looked up and found was the Association of Specialist Underpinning Contractors. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Robin, and good afternoon, everybody. Much of my work, as Robin has alluded to, relates to the professions, the civil engineers, structural engineers. I also work a lot with local authority building control, and in fact, I'm about to share a presentation with you that is actually badged up LABC because I'm lazy and I've also been on holiday, so I haven't managed to change the format, so my apologies. But nonetheless, hopefully this will work. And in front of you should be a screen that says LABC Subsidence 2022 and 23. Tim's presentation is brilliant in the sense that it actually identifies a lot of the issues that we're facing, particularly with regard to climate change. And I will echo the view that we should be under no illusion whatsoever that climate change is going to have a significant effect on the ground and the way the ground behaves. And in essence, when the ground behaves badly, then whatever is up top of the ground will also behave badly. And so we'll see what this all means. So just bear with me. So it's obligatory, by the way, that when engineers talk about cracks, they have to show cracks, and they have to show loads of photographs of cracks. So I'm going to show a few photographs of cracks, but in the context of the issue of trees, because I'm an engineer, and some of you may think, oh God, all he wants to do is rip out the trees. No, actually, I don't. And in fact, we do sometimes fall into the illusion that all cracks are caused by trees. Well, they're not. And I can assure you that they're not, because I have probably looked at more cracks than anybody else around. And I even used to run a competition at our company called Crack of the Week, where we would actually identify the biggest crack that we possibly could and why. Rarely were they caused by trees. So cracks in front of you there, poor design. You had good quality foundations under the main structure, and then for some bizarre reason they want to make the foundations under the bay window shallower, and of course you have an ingress of stormwater, and you have failure caused by that. You've then got minor cracks here, and everybody throws their arms up in dismay and says, oh, we've got subsidence on the way. Well, actually you haven't. There's no subsidence there at all. You've got trees, you've got cracks caused by different materials getting warmer and colder at different stages, and so you've got differential cracking just due to changes in temperature. You've then got stuff like this, and no tree around. However, big however here, you've got a very, very mature bush to the left-hand side, just creeping into view, and we have an estate, a small estate of houses here. They didn't even get to 2 years old when cracks started appearing, and it was discovered that it was an old site of an orchard. Trees had been taken out, hedges and other trees had been left in. You had combinations of shrinkage of the soils and swelling of the soils, and all hell breaks loose, and that's what you get. So we do have vegetation in the mix here, but it has to be stressed, and I'll stress again, not trees that cause the problem, it's the soil that is the problem. And it just happens that there are some issues and some places where trees take water out of the soil, and the soil is clay soil, and that then changes the behavior of the soil. So you might have a tree that is deemed to be close to the structure. The roots of the tree here, this is a tree in London, the roots of the tree here are actually touching the foundations. Not a crack in sight, not a problem at all. And it will probably remain that way for the next 50 years. So again, assumptions are sometimes drawn that are not quite correct. Let's go back to this crack though. Clearly work has to be done. In this particular instance, this particular structure was suffering on one side from the swelling of the ground, which was pushing the building upwards, and on the other side of it, shrinkage of the ground, which was dragging the foundations downwards. And that's what this is a photograph of. It is not uncommon to have that sort of a situation, part of a structure going up, part of a structure going down, and maybe the middle of it staying where it is. So this is a complex issue, but the rectification may not necessarily require the removal of the hedge or the tree or whatever. It may need some clever engineering to indeed deal with that. And of course you get the cracks on the inside, and again, no engineer's presentation would be complete without a crack on the inside and a movement gauge across the crack. So there you have it. You can't say you've been shortchanged. And certainly subsidence can be caused by other things. There's even, as you can see on the left, a cartoon about it. And sadly, the house on the right suffered a little bit of subsidence. The BRE, the Building Research Establishment, have a document that showed crack widths, and the crack widths are up to 25 millimeters. Well, that crack there is a bit more, I would suggest, in the overall scheme of things. There's another of a picture of it. No tree problems here. This was the problem associated with a collapsed canal tunnel. So we always have to look at what's around, what could be the cause of the problem, and structures, subterranean structures and services and drains and all that sort of thing play a major part in subsidence across the UK, and cracking in buildings and so on. So again, this is the sort of thing that we have to look at. Just another shot of the same thing. Quite a serious situation, ended up in demolition of the whole structure. So what information have we got to play with? Because there's loads of information around, and Tim has alluded to some really, really useful information that is telling us that we really need to take this subject seriously. The past can tell us things here. And I suppose the slight bit of good news, which is viewing of this graph, claims 2000 to 2021, is that claims are generally on the decrease. Regrettably, if we now throw this forward and forecast what's going to happen, I think that you'll see, as Tim has said, you're going to see an increase in claims. And that will be almost certainly a sustained increase in claims rather than a hit and miss type approach. Nowadays, we have the benefit of information from MOREX, the Meteorological Office, where they view rainfall and evaporation and hours of sunlight and all the rest of the clever stuff, and they are able to predict to some degree what will be going on in the near future. But we actually have to take account of what is going to happen quite a distance into the future. Again, to some degree, I'm mirroring what Tim has put up here. We really need to understand what climate is doing to us. Tim put up figures for 2022, the figures that were before that, 2018. Again, I'll leave you to read through all of those. But the thing to draw out of this is that we're not looking at small increases when we have what we call a surge year. What we're actually looking at is massive increases, which can throw everybody off. And I suppose in a way, throw insurance companies into a panic. And they always seem to panic when something like this happens. And when you've got a situation where panic ensues, then you really have to be sure that the decisions that you make are the correct ones. So what are we seeing within the industry now? Well, obviously we're seeing situations where we have clay shrinkage. If a tree or a hedge is there, then that's likely to be exacerbating the problem, but not always. And we really, really do have to make sure that when we do our site investigations and our assessments of the clay and what type of clay it is and how it behaves, we've got loads of background information, we make the right choices there. We are seeing more problems associated with leaking drains. We've obviously got the flood susceptibility associated with deluge conditions. Even our new issues associated with putting stormwater back into the ground via attenuation can, if it's not treated correctly, cause problems. And again, Tim's pointed out that mining can be a cause as well. We also need to look at the situation where we are increasing the number of air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. Air source heat pumps don't cause a problem, but certainly if we don't get the design right of the heat resource for a ground source heat pump, then we could be in we could have a problem. So this is really where I come in some respects. The Institution of Structural Engineers, since the early 90s, 1994, have had a publication out there in the market called Subsidence of Low-Rise Buildings. It was revised in 2000 And in the last year, 18 months, a panel of us have been looking at a revision that will hopefully be published towards the end of this year. That revision will actually focus on a different title. The title will just be Subsidence, and it will not only review what information we have within the publication that's up there on the screen, but we'll be adding brand new information and information on the sort of data that there is around nowadays, on the predictions. There's alternative rectification processes. There's more direct guidance in the book, and there is elements for future research. So please look out for the new book. It, as I say, it will be out towards the middle end of this year. It's pretty much written. It's just in for review and the editorial vetting and so on. So this is going to be a really good book and a really useful document, and an up-to-date document as well that will be tell us the order of the day. Another book that we should be looking at, another publication, is this, the NHBC document Foundation Solutions, Future-Proofing Against Climate Change. Now, this is really, really important, because what we don't want to be doing is forever underpinning or dealing with subsidence repairs. We actually need to build resilient buildings, and we need to be building them with resilient foundations that are going to be able to deal with the effects of climate change. So I would urge you, if you have an interest in this sort of stuff, to get hold of this publication. You can go onto the NHBC website, and I believe you can download it free of charge. So I would urge you to do that. If we are looking at putting alternative foundations in that are going to be better for everybody, better for the environment and better for the climate change issues, then look no further to this document, which was produced probably 11 or 12 years ago, and will talks about the sort of foundations that we need to be building now, the sort of foundations that will allow us to plant trees within 3 or 4 meters of either existing buildings or proposed buildings, because that's what we actually need to be able to do. And on that note, I could wax lyrical about loads of other stuff to do with subsidence, but probably my time is up, and so I'm going to stop sharing at this point and hand over to the next speaker. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John. That was really good. And in a way, I sort of you spent such a long time in your life promoting shortboard piles and other alternative systems. That's all for further discussion. Sue, questions?
Yeah, so a quick one from Glenys about the number of, why has the number of claims decreased over recent years? I assume that's climate related, isn't it?
It's to some degree it may be, but it's probably more because insurance companies are, I'm going to paraphrase, insurance companies are getting tighter. In years gone by, a long time ago, the slightest crack and you could go to the insurance company and they'd pay up. And that's what kept me in business, certainly for at least 10, 15 years. But they have obviously looked at situations more carefully over the years. And as I say, and as I said earlier, not all cracks in buildings are down to subsidence. And certainly not all cracks in buildings are insured risks. So we're seeing a number of issues that are, if you like, factors in the reduction of claims. But obviously, when you get a surge year, then that's when you see them go up again.
So one of the things that passed through my mind when you were looking at, these relatively new builds that are having problems, is whether developers are taking enough care to do site surveys, what's gone on underground before they even start, because collapse canals and orchard tree roots pits and things are sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, Sue. You do wonder sometimes if anybody's even walked around the site, to be honest, when you get some information and some inquiries for foundations. But assuming that they have, then the first thing you need to do is a desktop survey. That will tell you what might have been there in the past, what probably was there in the past, and that will lead you to start thinking about how you design your foundations. But I think we need to be concentrating on the now. And the now is that there's a desire to plant millions more trees, quite rightly so. New developments have more trees on them. We should be looking at not just site investigations, but landscape plans. And that all, if you like, leads to better designs of foundations and substructure works. And when I say better, I'm very carefully saying better because it doesn't necessarily follow that it's going to be more expensive. Nowadays, if you dig great big deep holes and fill them full of concrete, you're spending a fortune, an absolute fortune, and you don't need to be. So I would say that, wouldn't I? But nonetheless, just look at the economics and test it out. And we really shouldn't be digging deep holes and filling them with concrete. That's a whole different subject. Or
particularly when we bring in our carbon calculation,
Yeah.
which I know you and I have done.
Absolutely. It's ludicrous.
Just a
Anyway.
quick question, because Si has posed, are there any figures to show the number of vegetative and non-vegetative subsidence claims? And Sarah's sort of partially answered it, but is that something that you've got a definition, distinction between, John, or is that one we've got to all pick up separately?
I suppose simple answer is no, not really, because it depends so very much on where you are geographically. We simple engineers like to draw a diagonal line down from the Wash down to Weymouth, and we tend to suggest that the bulk of problems to the south and east of that line are clay related, and the bulk of the problems to the north and the west aren't. But that particular issue is changing, I have to say, as well, because of the number of climate related problems that we get, and we're getting more and more deluge problems and washout problems, nothing to do with trees at all.
So we probably need to move on, but there's a good question from Giovanna.
Yes, I was going to say, Giovanna hoped that our revision might be more of the iStruct ebook might be more sympathetic to trees. And I think we can probably say that, yes, it is, isn't it? We've sort of picked up the role of trees with climate change. And when do we know when it'll be out? Is that still?
Not just yet, but it's probably 3 months.
Okay.
I think the iStruct is very impressive in terms of its leadership on climate, on changing behaviors in the face of climate change. So to be applauded. Okay, thanks, John, very much. I think we now need to go to the heart of the matter. Jim Smith is the Forestry Commission's National Urban Forestry Advisor. Jim.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin. I'm going to start sharing my screen if you could confirm when it comes up. How's that going?
Not yet.
Can you see anything?
Came up before.
It did. Hang on, let me try again. Oh, just a minute.
While Jim's wrestling with the technology, I'm really the chat is beginning to develop. So please do join in the conversation. There we go.
Is that there? Yeah.
We've got yeah.
Good. Okay.
That's a slideshow. So,
yeah, I'm just going to. Unfortunately, the top bar is covering my open the documents. So here we go. the little green bar is covering it where it says slideshow. Hang on, I'll move it down a bit.
Yeah.
God. Here we go. Right, I've got it now. Sorry about the delay. That should be it.
Yep. Lovely.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I'm Jim Smith. I'm the Forestry Commission's National Urban Forestry Advisor. And here really to give you a view on what the government response is to the issue of subsidence. And it's been something that's been developing over time. And those of you who know how the FC and others have been involved with this, with groups like TDAG over the years, will know this is a long-term issue, and it's going to take a while.
Have we got 100 limit? I thought you had 500. I've just got so many people saying I can't get in. I can't get in.
Okay, sorry, Sue. Yeah, shall I keep going? Yeah.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry. I mean, I'm just going to tell them. I'm so sorry.
So
might,
we can all hear
500
you.
limit, but something's gone wrong.
So
Okay.
Oh.
The government's take on this has been that it's got involved quite early on in this, in terms of the Forest Commission's involvement. I'll mention more about that later. But the modern, should we say, the current contemporary iteration of dealing with the issue of subsidence is more about. I'm going to talk about two to three projects that we've been involved with, the FC have been involved with, and with other government departments as well. And the first one was the right tree in the urban. It's called the Urban Tree Manual, but shorthand. But it's the right tree in the right place for a resilient future. This was a document that was produced and published in support of the government's 2017 manifesto commitment to plant 1 million urban trees. And part of that was about preparing local authorities and also people who are involved with this, landscape architects, etc., with having the information at their fingertips so that they can plant, as John has mentioned earlier, and also Tim, resilient trees into the future, but those which don't cause problems. So that's the first thing in terms of the principal government response to this. I would add that more recently we've got a tree canopy cover target, which was introduced last year, I think it was, or earlier this year, for having 16.5% tree canopy cover. And I know that has been criticised as being not high enough, but my view as someone who's worked in government for a while is that this having a target at all is an achievement, and we need to work on that going forward. And John also mentioned the National House Building Council document NF93 Foundation Solutions, which has got some really good stuff in it. And I completely reiterate what John said about making sure that future development can accommodate the presence of trees. What it does do, though, is it suggests alternatives to tree planting, which are green roofs and green walls, which I don't disagree with that, but I think we do need to focus on the main event here, which is future-proofing the buildings so that we can have trees and a lot of tree canopy cover in our sort of building cities and areas in the future. We've also got the national, in terms of government response, the National Model Design Code, which is more about design, doesn't go into the practicalities of it. But what I think this does, and the national, the guidance notes for those design codes, it secures as a matter of policy, government policy, the place of the tree in the urban environment. And if you look at these two documents, all the illustrations there have trees in them on streets and highways and things like that. So an important step change, I think, in terms of guidance that's been produced by government in the past for making sure that trees are considered going forward. We've also got the England Trees Action Plan, and I'm going to home in on a few projects that we've been involved with about this. That was published in July 2021, and it really articulates what government wants to do in terms of making trees, urban trees particularly, in our towns and cities have a better deal than they have done up to this point. And I'm just going to go into one of the actions from that England Tree Action Plan is ETAP 08, Urban Local Authorities and Public Bodies, and its action 3.17 was to work with engineers, developers and arboriculturalists. And with that, we mean local authorities, tree officers, to get more trees on streets and in developments, including by revising the manual for streets, which is still currently under review at the minute, and potentially amending the National House Building Guidance on Foundations. Now, we in government recognise that this is a negotiation. It's not something we can foist on the sector, but we've been working hard with people like TDAG and John's organisation and others to actually assist with that and make sure that we get better outcomes for trees in those areas. And some of the examples is the current revision of the London Tree Officers Association document, Risk Limitation for Tree Root Claims, which looks into, among other things, zoning and making sure that local authorities challenge insurers when they're given information about whether or not a tree should or shouldn't be felled. That's a really important document that's being revised at the moment by the LTOA, and the FC have been assisting with that. We've got the revision of the Joint Mitigation Protocol, which was first produced, I think it was 2008. That's now under review. And one of the big step changes there is that the previous iteration had value bands for trees, putting valuations on trees, so deciding which levels of investigation. The current iteration, which is being worked on at the moment, is going to link the type of investigations that trees will be subject to if they're implicated in causing damage, tree-related damage. It will link that to those published on Deluxe website for dealing with TPO trees, so trees covered by tree preservation orders. Traditionally, they had a higher standard, a higher level of investigation required. The new Joint Mitigation Protocol will actually link that with the same levels of standards. So all trees in the future, if the two parties for this Joint Mitigation Protocol, which is a mutually agreed way of dealing with those claims, if they both agree, then trees will be considered as having high value throughout. So that's really important. And then, as John has just mentioned, the revision of the IStructEase document, Subsidence of Low-Rise Buildings, which is almost complete, but it's being worked on at the minute. And that's something that the FC and TDAG have been heavily involved with. And in answer to the person's question, I've forgotten who asked that question. Yes, it is more sympathetic, I think, to trees than earlier versions. The second edition was actually groundbreaking, and the then Institute of Structural Engineers was really forward thinking in terms of getting trees in there, and I think they've stayed true to that message and that ethos. And what's in there now currently, with all the updated technical data that we put in there, secures the position of the tree in that process. So I'm pleased to say that that's been a real success. I'm looking forward to seeing it published. Also, some of you will be aware is the government's duty to consult on felling of street trees, which is section 115 of the Environment Act. That's obviously that was got royal assent last year, I think it was, and that will mean that local authorities must consult members of the public before felling a tree on an urban road. There's a definition there what an urban road is, but a number of exemptions will apply. So dead trees, dangerous trees, and trees required to be felled under the Plant Health Act, trees causing equality access issues, and those that are subject to a valid planning permission. Oh, sorry, too far. But also, what you should know is that there will be specific actions that a local authority will need to do when, as part of the guidance that we're currently producing with DEFRA, the FC is currently working with DEFRA on. That's placing a notice on the tree before they have an intention of felling it, giving a reason, providing a contact email, and giving interested parties the opportunity to comment, consider those comments, and then publish the authority's decision. And what local authorities will have to do is record and hold all that relevant information. Now, in the context of this particular workshop, some of you may know that certain elements of damage on the highway will be exempt from the need to consult. But I'm pleased to say that DEFRA have understood that if a tree is implicated in a subsidence claim, so damaging a building foundation or a structure's foundation, that damage won't be exempt, and local authorities will be required to consult on, if it's a healthy tree, consult on the felling of that tree, and that will enable them to get adequate evidence from the insurers and produce, if they want to, put that evidence available for people to see, or just hold it as evidence in their records, so that the bad old days of when an insurer might just say, oh, we want you to fell this tree, and give them a really poorly written report, those hopefully will be by the by. And what this duty consult will do, my expectation is that it will push more local authorities and insurers and loss adjusters, the people who deal with claims handlers, it will push them towards joining the joint mitigation protocol in a mutually agreed process, so that everyone understands where they are and what can be done in terms of resolving the issues. So less trees should be felled as a result of that, without adequate evidence. So the evidence should be supplied. And that's about it from me. I think I'm up to my time. So thanks very much. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Jim. I'm sure the chat is very busy out there. Before we start the questions, Sue, I just want to say that the reference to NF 93, the NHBC Foundation publications are aimed at house builders, which means that they are really quite readable. And I strongly recommend them, but it's also a means of holding house builders to account a bit if they haven't read them. So anyhow, Sue, questions?
I think there's so many. I sort of thought perhaps if Sarah can explain the legal things, then we could just pick them all up together, because they're all falling over each other.
Okay. Well, let's go straight on and then get into a longer discussion, because we've got should have plenty of time. Sarah Dodd is, in her words, a tree-hugging lawyer specializing in bringing and defending civil disputes, in particular legal claims arising from damage to property caused by vegetation. She is the founder director of Tree Law. Sarah.
Thanks very much, Robin, and hi everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I will share my screen, share my slides. Right, so subsidence law. I'm going to be looking at my screen over here, so do excuse me if I'm sort of turning my face away from you guys, but I'm going to do a quick session on subsidence law. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I've tried to pick up on the bit that seems to be the most contentious in this area. So we'll start from the beginning. So talking about law, so I'm thinking past the point at which there's been a discussion about whether the tree is going to come out or not. And I'm getting to the point now where there's a legal claim against a tree owner to recover money damages after the property has been repaired. So when we think about what law is being used here, this is the law of nuisance and negligence. They're two different sorts of law, but it can really be used interchangeably. And in order for a claimant to succeed against a defendant tree owner, they have to be able to satisfy 3 steps in the negligence test. So those are that there's been a breach of duty, that the damage was foreseeable to the defendant, and that actually the tree was in fact the cause of the damage. I've also popped down there that in terms of local authorities, you can include a claim in the Highways Act, but I will not be dealing with the Highways Act for the purpose of this short piece. So the bit that tends to be the most contentious at the moment is the issue of foreseeability. So foreseeability is whether the tree owner was able to anticipate that the tree could cause a risk of damage to the property before that actually occurred. If you rewind back to before 2012, that step in the negligence test was really just a tick box step. You could just say local authorities are tree owners, they've got tree officers, they've got engineers, they know about subsidence. Yep, tick, the damage was foreseeable. But then 2012 hits and a couple of cases were before the court which actually changed this area. And no longer could you just say, yes, a local authority is able to foresee the risk of a tree causing damage. And there are actually quite a few steps that you need to consider before you can show that as a claimant. There are 3 generic ways that this can be done. So the first way is if the local authority had been put on notice that their tree was a risk of causing damage to the property. Now, this isn't a generic put on notice. This has got to be specific. This has got to be that specific tree is a potential risk of damage to that specific property. Now, the easiest way for this to have happened is if there'd been a prior claim. So, we've just had a surge event back in 2022. The surge before that was 2018. So if there's a property which has got some damage now as a result of 2022, and also it damaged back in 2018, and the council had been told in 2018, then that prior claim may be enough to actually put the council on notice and tick that foreseeability box. But apart from that, you move into the other two areas of real risk and hotspot areas. And unfortunately, although these are two things that have been introduced by the courts, there aren't any specific definitions of this. We've really got to start building a picture so we can see whether we can tick the foreseeability box using either of these. Oh, I've done the notice one, so I'll skip through that. So real risk, what a real risk is, and this is a photograph of the property where the real risk test came from, is it's reference to an objective risk, for example, where a tree is so large and so unique and so obvious a risk, given the known characteristics of an area, that a reasonable local authority should take action to ensure that tree doesn't cause damage. Unfortunately, as I said, there's no real risk test. It's just a question of judgment. So in this one, looking at the trees there next to that property, it was found that those trees did pose a real risk because they were just so tall and so very close to that property. So in terms, I think, of what sort of tree a local authority would be able to class as a real risk, it needs to be a unique type, size, location of tree, such that if a local authority was to sort of draw a ring around all of those on a map, there would just be a handful of them. You know, they wouldn't be able to say, well, all plane trees in our area are a real risk. That's too much. It really needs to be those real outliers that actually could apply to that real risk. I thought then this is just a bit of a curious picture. So that's the case. That's the property in the case of Khan versus Kane. And I thought, out of curiosity, that was there's a before and after shot there. So that's on the left is the old position, and then on the right is what's actually the position now. So it looks like both properties have been developed, and there's hardly any trees left. So that's a pretty sad point. Nothing legal there, but a pretty sad point. Then the third one is hotspot area. And we hear this a lot, and I think it's come up in the chat a little bit with someone saying about insurance companies not wanting to insure properties, even when they're not in these hotspot areas. So what a hotspot area is it's an area where there have been a significant number, sort of a cluster of previous subsidence claims, such that actually the local authority in that area should have rolled out a different sort of maintenance and tree reduction regime, because they knew full well that it was an area where houses were susceptible to damage, and there'd been loads of claims there in the past. They needed to put in sort of a different and unique tree maintenance regime. So this is where there's often situations with people making Freedom of Information Act requests to local authorities and asking local authorities, please tell us all about your prior claims in this postcode area. So in terms of hotspot area, you really need to be looking at, if you've got a claimant's property on a certain street, you need to be looking at, were there other previous subsidence claims in that vicinity? So on that street or in the very, very close surrounding streets to that. Again, no defined test, so it's a little bit of a best guess when dealing with what is a hotspot or what's not. Then move on quickly to causation. So this is, did the tree actually cause the damage to the property? And we've spoken about this a lot. It's not always the tree. There can be loads of other potential causes, which are often sort of skipped over or not necessarily considered. The tree can be the easiest target. I don't mean to sound political, but it can be. So often the tree is attacked for, well, let's just get the tree down and see if it stabilizes the property. Oh, no, it hasn't stabilized the property. So let's have another think about actually what the real cause is. So I put a couple of things from my experience. I mean, I'm not an engineer, I'm a lawyer, but this is my experience of what other potential causes of cracking could be. So leaking drains, just general sun causing evaporation for the ground, some differential movement. So that's where you've got shallow foundations in one part of a property, built and attached perhaps to an extension which has got deeper foundations, and that difference between those two parts of the property, the stable extension and the slightly less stable main property, and it can cause cracking between the two of them. heave. I've got solution features there. Tim put a really nice picture of a sinkhole on his talk, which I think I've actually visited that property, Tim. Roof spread, lack of lateral restraints. There are a few of my alternatives. But investigation in these cases is key. As I said, just because there's a tree nearby doesn't mean that the tree has caused the damage. And even in the hottest of hotspot areas, there's potentially no more than a 5% chance that any tree is going to cause damage to any property. And I think actually 5% is probably a bit high. And I know Kieran Hart's on this meeting, and I think he'd probably put that as a slightly lower percentage. We've spoken about that in the past. But in reality, this isn't always a situation where there's one clear cause. There can be loads of factors all at play together. We've got leaking drains and subsidence. It can be a chicken and egg situation. You've got leaking drains with tree roots in them. So has the subsidence been caused by the leaking drains? Are the drains leaking because the roots grew into them? So it can really be quite a complex factual situation to investigate, hence the need for a Sherlock Holmes type character. That's a massive whistle-stop tour through that though, but if you want to hear more from me, then do feel free to scan the QR code on screen, because I'm hosting a series of seminars over the summer. Cardiff, Birmingham, London and Leeds. Cardiff sold out, but still tickets available for the others. So if you want to hear more about the wonderful area of tree law, then do feel free to come along.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Everyone's been so concise. That gives us opportunity to have discussions. Sue, can you stitch the last two together?
There's a lot going on. So one of the things that's come up quite a lot, which I find really interesting, Stuart Marshall picked it up, is the whole question of insurers and distances. We've got a fascinating situation here now where Jim pointed out the model design code, where all new streets will have trees, but they're actually too close to the buildings if you take the insurers' distances, so they can't have those, and so on. I mean, I think it's probably one for Jim, but what's our next step?
So they can, if the buildings are built knowing that those trees are going to be planted, the planning permission should say they should have the knowledge of what trees are going to be planted. And as John has pointed out, technically that can be done using designed foundations now. If you're on a clay soil, those new buildings, and it's new streets we're talking about, new streets and new buildings, new developments, they should be built to accommodate the presence of the trees that are on the landscape plan. It's as simple as that.
So that's a local authority has to insist on, has to require that.
When I was a planning tree officer, I put a condition on all my new developments like that, that the foundations of the property had to be designed and constructed to accommodate the presence of the species and final mature size and scale of the trees that were on the landscape plan, and then you got what you wanted.
So just following on from that, Maurice Simpson made a point. This is still sticking with new developments, because I realize we also have to think about existing, but on new developments, he made the point that developers won't plant large trees because they perceive them as having high water uptake and therefore likely to cause problems. But we all know that for climate change, we want more large trees. So
some developers do. I used to find that the high-end developers, because they were willing to put in well-designed constructed foundations that would accommodate the presence of trees, and often they were doing that anyway because they wanted to retain some of the large landscape trees on the site because they saw that as being a selling point. But when you're talking about new build and new planting, I think the better developers, they do understand that, and they do that. And I went to I've forgotten who it was now, but I went to one of their design lead conferences a while back that you put me in touch with them, Sue. And they acknowledge that that's what they do, and they want to plant street trees, so they do that. They use those, where there are clay soils, they do put adequate foundations in, and they understand that if you're talking, and John, correct me if you're wrong, but if you're setting up on a big development of over 100 or 200 units, if you're set up to do that, it's cost effective, isn't it, sort of thing?
Absolutely it is, and there's no doubt about that. And I sort of refer back to what I said about digging deep holes and filling those holes with concrete. Nowadays, the costs associated with both the disposal of material and also the aggregate tax, issues associated with cement manufacture. You know, we have to recognize, for example, that cement manufacture throughout the world contributes 8% of the entire world's CO2. That's more than aviation. So that's something else that we need to be recognizing. But I agree with Jim that the better developers, generally the regional developers, it does have to be said, do recognize that there is a need, particularly on the higher end developments, to incorporate a robust landscaping detail. And that will necessarily mean that they need to give details of the trees, what trees they are, because we're not experts at trees in the foundations industry. We just need to be told what tree it is, what the mature height will be, and then we can decide, well, actually on that particular development where a tree is going to be, say, 4 or 5 meters away from the new development, then we need this kind of foundation or that kind of foundation. We're very adept at being able to do that. And certainly in terms of costs, the costs associated with generally piled foundations, because generally it's piled foundations that will be the ones that will be the best in terms of dealing with any root activity. The costs of those sort of foundations are becoming more and more attractive with the higher volumes of activity. And certainly on a big site where the mobilization costs of the large pieces of equipment can be amortized across the whole site, it's very cost effective. So it's down to us within the industry to start to continue to get that message across. But I will say that it is up to the warranty providers and building control, and I know building control are on board, and and our warranty providers as well, but they need to be banging that same drum. The NF93 is a publication that starts to do that, but there's more that the warranty providers can do, not just NHBC, but the others in the marketplace can do to reassure the market that foundations can be designed and constructed economically to deal with landscaping. And it's just, I say this tongue-in-cheek, but it's as simple as that.
Just quickly, Giovanna asked this 5% figure. So Martin Dobson said actually it's less than 1%, but she's also made the point, I thought insurers only have to prove the tree was a contributory factor. Is that actually how it is?
That can be quite a big legal question. And I think it depends on what stage of the legal claim you're thinking about that. I think if we're looking at the point at which you're actually seeking monetary damages from a tree owner, at that point, the claim will be against whatever the primary cause is. There's quite a bit of argument about contributory factors, because as I said before, there's often quite a few factors at play at the same time. So I think it's difficult to give just one answer to that. It's going to be very fact specific and depend. But I know in response to that, the Martin Dobson also commented that yes, you know, and a very good point that this is an on the balance of probabilities. You know, what is the primary cause of the damage on the balance of probabilities rather than a sort of a criminal standard of proof.
So my last thing was, because we've talked a lot about new developments, but obviously actually quite a number of the claims are on existing properties, obviously. So we can future proof, but what's happening with existing properties? And I'm just wondering, when our insurers, we were talking a lot in our iStruct-E document and well in our discussions about the importance of factoring tree value into decisions, you know, when the tree is more valuable than the cost of repair and so on. Is that something that we're going to get insurance companies or whatever to kind of pick up? And
Sue, I think that's where things like the Joint Mitigation Protocol and the London Tree Officers Risk Limitation Strategy document assists with that, and they've, you know, the LTA have led the way in that regard. They produced that years ago. And I think it's it's making sure that tree officers who are effectively they're at the coalface of this. They're dealing with insurers and requests to fell trees all the time. They're one of the key players. Tree officers are one of the key players in this sort of scenario. And I think what's happening now is the sector is beginning to catch up with what the LTOA were arguing 10 years ago. And hopefully the new revision of their document and also the JMP will mean, coupled with the duty to consult, so that they will be able to tell insurers, you've got to provide us with this adequate information, because I'm not going to fell that tree unless you can provide me with adequate evidence. And that's a legislative thing that will become law.
Perfect. So
Very
the duty to
good.
consult will apply to everything. So Robin, over to introducing.
I think we should have the last presentation, which is, and then we have a wider discussion. And this is a team effort from a Haringey community group called SHIFT, which stands for Stop Home Insurers Felling Trees. And Glenys Law is going to introduce them. Glenys. Got the slide?
Yep. Can you see the slides?
Yep. Lovely.
Okay, brilliant. So Shift evolved during lockdown when 5 mature oaks in ancient woodlands were threatened with felling due to an insurance claim in a neighbouring house. The public outcry led to a realisation that this was just one case amongst many, that thousands of trees in streets and private gardens are being lost through insurance claims. And we felt that something had to be done. Hold on. Nope. Hold on, just see. There we go. Since then, we've helped many individuals to fight against insurance threats, and we have campaigned on a number of principles, emphasising the importance of mature trees in resolving the climate and ecological emergency. Challenge the principle that a mature tree can simply be replaced by new planting, which you hear so often. Make local authorities value their current canopy cover, not just think that they can achieve a certain level of canopy cover through new planting. And challenge the way the insurance industry deals with subsidence, because for all the good things we've heard in this workshop, still on the ground, there's an awful lot that's going wrong. I'll hand over to my colleague, Professor Duckett, at this point. I hope. Jeff, are you there? We should have
possibly.
Right. Is Jeff ready to speak?
He was there earlier on.
He was there. He was visible and he wasn't muted. Are you there, Jeff? Okay. Shall I've got his words in front of me. I can tell you what he would have been saying if he had been with us.
He's just for some reason his audio isn't working. Sorry, I'm just coming in. Should we go to mine and then come back to Jeff? Says he's
no, I can read it out. Jeff is a professional botanist with a major research interest in mycorrhizal fungal symbiosis in tree roots. He's been involved with trees and buildings for 35 years. And brings to this a fundamental understanding of the biology of trees and key issues surrounding vegetation, retention and damage to buildings. One point he wanted to make is, although the carbon retention by trees is well known, but to this date has focused almost exclusively on the aerial parts. And we now know that mature or mother trees store as much carbon below ground as above. And the retention of mature trees has therefore now become even more important, he says. Subsidence damage caused by trees is only significant on clay soils, as we all, well, that's one of the causes. The extent of this depends on tree size, distance from the building and the tree species. So, for example, oaks, poplars, willows and cypresses pose the greatest risk. And since water demand is closely related to leaf area, it can be reduced by regular pruning, as is carried out on plane trees across London. The standard case for requesting tree felling rests almost entirely on the identification of tree roots in trial pits or boreholes, with little or no attention to the size of the trees, their distance from the property, and certainly not the age of the building relative to the trees. These are the sort of things he has encountered in so many of the cases he's been called to advise on. He says many London plains are of the same age as the adjacent Victorian buildings, and threats of subsidence damage can be much reduced or solved by regular pruning. However, most subsidence claims are on buildings that were erected long after the trees had reached their present dimensions. Thus, the blame must rest on poor foundations, not on inadequate vegetation management. And this is clearly illustrated by two recent cases. The request to fell 5 mature oak trees in ancient woodland, by far the most green resource in London. This is in Queenswood, Highgate. Though there is little doubt that the oaks were contributing to the damage, they predate the property by many decades. Indeed, a previous property on the site was, sorry, that's the wrong one. Indeed, a previous property on the site was demolished because of subsidence. Thus, when the replacement was erected, the tree issue was well known, but clearly not acted on by the digging of deeper foundations or better foundations. A request to fell young oaks in Coldfall Wood, Barnet, another ancient woodland, due to subsidence in the extension of an adjacent property. Jeff's site visit revealed that 2 mature oaks had already been felled 2 years earlier, but without notifying any local groups or neighbours. Since the felling of the mature oaks had not solved the problem, it was clear that felling younger ones certainly wouldn't. The problem was inadequate foundations, and all the more so since the site slopes towards the wood, rendering the substratum unstable, even without the trees. The council went ahead and felled the younger trees, ignoring protests from the community. The law as it stands weighs very heavily in favour of tree felling by insurance companies. This is how things operate in practice, certainly as we've experienced it here in Haringey. Jeff says this is ignorant and wrong. I will hand over now to Giovanna, whose microphone is working, I hope.
Yes.
Giovanna.
Hello, thanks very much, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here, giving the community view on protecting mature trees, especially, where I think a lot of the problems are currently lying. So we're the Haringey Tree Protectors. We're a group of residents that formed in 2021. We aim to protect and preserve existing mature trees under increasing threat by insurers, councils, developers, central government. And just like Shift, who we're a sister group to Shift, we want to see much more robust law. I mean, I was really pleased to hear from the Forestry Commission gentleman, I can't remember his name, sorry, about the strengthening of kind of regulation and that's going to be coming in hopefully with this duty to consult. But we want to see much more robust laws to protect existing trees. At the moment, they're really falling between the cracks, to use a phrase probably that relates to trees causing cracks as well. But so our contact details are there. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at Just Plain News. There's a lot of tree community groups all over the UK, and we're trying to connect up to form a coalition. Could you put the next slide on, please? So trees are now really big news. I don't know if you've noticed with Plymouth, with Sheffield, Wellingborough, there's lots and lots of cases of communities rising up to try to save existing trees. These are just a few of our press cuttings. We're in the Telegraph, the Evening Standard, the Daily Mail. We're in lots of local press. There were podcasts being made about, and as you can see, this was a particular case of a plane tree, 120-year-olds, that is in Stroud Green, North London. Perfectly healthy tree with 2 insurers, Allianz and Aviva, long-running complicated case. This was it covered in white plastic. You may have seen it on the news. It had 24-hour security, and it resembles something like a nuclear facility rather than a tree. For a week, it cost our council £92,000 for this security operation, which was a real big shock to everyone in the community. So I just thought I'd sort of sum up some of the press we've been getting. If you could just do the next slide. Thank you. So we feel, you know, from our experience, we feel like the status quo really isn't working with regarding the insurance industry and trees, mature trees. And it's highly problematic. And I'm just going to go through a few of the things that we have found as a community group. And it, you know, when we're coming up against the whole many issues regarding the insurance industry and trees. We found an alarming degree of complacency and hostility and a kind of business as usual approach from insurers towards homeowners and communities and councils when they try to save trees. Insurers have been blaming trees in terms of complacency for decades to avoid underpinning work, passing the cost on to councils who often can't pay the huge sums. And this status quo that presides, despite the speed of the climate and biodiversity crises, needs to be shaken up. Threatened by councils, threatened by insurers, councils end up spending thousands of pounds to protect their interests rather than protecting trees and their residents. This creates huge community upset and anger at losing trees. Because the law currently makes the tree owner liable, even if the tree is only partially, as I understood, contributing to subsidence. There doesn't seem to be a standardized protocol for the monitoring process of trees in subsidence cases. In a recent case in North London, a mature oak tree in a scout park is under threat as it's said to be causing slight damage to a house 16 metres away. We found a system of flimsy, unreliable, partial tree reports, not always evidence-based or not with really robust evidence. Surveys are of course paid for by insurers. Owners often don't know they have a right to get surveys done independently. The soil issue was hugely interesting to hear about. Subsidence is often the result of inadequate foundations. I mean, we're on a clay soil here in Haringey, so is Camden and Islington. Yet insurers are not required to prove there are adequate building foundations before a claim for damages by a tree can be made. The nature of the soil is often ignored. As I say, my house, I'm in Haringey, my whole house shakes when a lorry now drives past. That's been happening for the last 3 years. I don't have a tree outside my house. We found bullying by insurers and loss adjusters towards homeowners, councils, threatening quasi-legal letters and calls received. All the while on insurers' websites, there's a lot of greenwash and net zero targeting language. Especially gracing the websites of some of the really big insurers, Allianz, Aviva, AXA. There's a significant data gap when trees are felled, no follow-up to ascertain whether removing the tree was successful. Homes in the same street without trees have been shown to have subsidence too, as discussed. Anecdotally, we hear of many cases where trees have been removed due to subsidence, but the damage continues because the soil is contracting and cracking. Once a claim is settled, insurers will seem to wipe their hands of the problem and the homeowner is cut loose, left in some cases to face years more problems on their foundations. Homeowners are not warned of the potential for more damaging heave issues. At the moment in Haringey, we have more than 200 live cases of insurance claims against trees, by the way, and 33 in our area alone on 2 streets. This all creates a really stressful toll on the mental and physical health for homeowners who may be blamed by the community for the loss of street trees that belong to everyone. Neighbours are aware that tree loss will make pollution worse, that it will increase the temperature of their streets, there'll be more bad health, and it also lowers house values. So when you've got lovely mature trees in a picture of a house being sold, it just keeps the value of the house. My final point is insurance industry really needs to modernise its tree policy, its approaches to trees, and possibly leave them out of claims altogether. Tree loss is now big news, and it's not going away as the climate and biodiversity crisis deepens. Thanks very much.
So we've got one more, Glenys, have we?
Yeah, there's Joe coming to talk about what he feels can be done. Thank you. Hand over to Joe.
Thank you, and thank you for having us today. I will keep it brief, but just with some thoughts about what we feel could be done to help the going forward. Some of the issues have been touched on by previous speakers as well. So at the moment, the law favours buildings over trees. As we begin to fully enter the climate emergency, we are being forced to understand that mature trees play a fundamental part in resolving the crisis that we have created. We need to develop the public's understanding of the role that trees play and adjust our laws to ensure that trees are protected. The Woodland Trust has stated that trees should be given the same protection as historic buildings. When a mature tree is felled, it is not just that single tree which is removed and the work it does in terms of carbon sequestration and flood and heat mitigation, but also a fundamental link in the biodiversity and mycorrhizal network that is profoundly impacted. We believe that the TPO system should be turned on its head. Currently, no trees have protection unless they are TPO'd or in a conservation area. Instead, by default, all trees should be protected and a felling order from the local council needed to remove them. Shift is currently supporting a petition to call for this. The initiative of Belfast City Council to demand a reversal of the TPO system so that the default position should be that all mature trees are protected as if they were TPO'd is an excellent one. TPOs currently cost councils lots of money, and also, if the law were changed, council tree officers would have more time for real tree care. With legislation of this sort, trees would only be removed if they were causing danger or the primary cause of subsidence and no other engineering solutions were possible. If a tree owner wishes to fell a tree for other reasons, they would need to apply to the local council and pay a fee if the council agrees that it can be removed. And there should be fines for the illegal felling of trees and charges for legal felling. The funds raised by this could be held in a tree preservation fund, which could be drawn on to help pay for engineering solutions where a tree is only partially contributing to subsidence. Because there is currently no standardized protocol for assessing whether a tree is to be removed in subsidence cases, a number of factors should be taken fully into account, which are not at the moment. The age of the building in relation to the tree. If a tree existed before the building designers should have taken this into consideration as part of their design. The quality of the foundations. A proper assessment of the building foundations must be made. If they are weak, which they often are, subsidence is likely to continue whether or not the tree is removed as our summers become hotter and drier. The management of the tree. Proper management of the tree and appropriate pruning will often reduce the impact of water extraction on the soil. Where a tree is shown to negatively be impacting a building, crown reduction with a comprehensive monitoring should be implemented rather than tree removal. And climate change, which we have discussed already, but our hotter, drier summers will lead to more subsidence cases on clay soils, whether trees are nearby or not. Insurers are currently able to weight liability towards trees rather than other contributing factors, as trees have little protection at the moment. New technologies for underpinning and root blocking should also be researched and highlighted. It is also important that tree protection groups should highlight the pressure that insurers put on individuals and councils to remove trees in subsidence claims. We need an independent government body to monitor tree losses and their protection enshrined in law to preserve our vital canopy for future generations. And I would just hand back to Glenys just to summarise quickly.
Yeah, I think, yep.
Sorry, we have overshot a little bit. Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. These are some of the thoughts and ideas we've been having, but going back to what we've been hearing in this seminar, I'd like to say that from the England Trees Action Plan, there is a lot of promise. We look forward to its full implementation, especially the duty to consult, which could answer some of our requests. We see that the promises 3.15 and 3.16, 3.17 go a long way towards fulfilling our demands, and we heartily welcome those. We cannot, however, see how improvements can be implemented without changes to the way the insurance sector deals with subsidence in actual practice. So there is no mention, as far as we could see, in the England Tree Action Plan of insurance claims and subsidence. As you know, the question of the duty to consult was being discussed in Parliament this week as a result of Catherine West's inquiries, and the Minister Harrison, answering that letter, said, "We are not planning to produce guidance for the insurance sector." That seems to me to be a fundamental problem, and we ask, why no guidance? We therefore hope that you'll support these demands. We feel that it really is time for a parliamentary select committee to investigate and remedy the problem of insurance and subsidence in trees. And secondly, as Joe has said, a Tree Preservation Act in Parliament to implement the promises of the England Trees Action Plan, more or less what we've been discussing, that the petition calls for, which is really giving all trees the benefit of a tree protection order, which would have to be reversed if they wanted to fell them. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry if we've gone on a bit too long.
Thank you, Gladys. I think it would be really interesting to get a response. If you can stop sharing the screen, please.
I will.
It'd be really good to get a response from Jim and then maybe Sarah on the proposed changes that this group has made.
Thank you.
Jim.
So thanks for that, Glynis. That's been really, really enlightening. I think, you know, I do really sympathise with many of the things that you're trying to achieve there. A couple of things that I'd like to point out is there is in terms of what Joe was saying, there is a recognised protocol for dealing with subsidence claims now. It's the Joint Mitigation Protocol. It was first published 2009, I think it was, as a joint cross-sector, so it was the tree sector and the insurance sector working together.
But with all due respect, Jim, it's not obligatory.
No. Let me finish. And it's being revised at the minute, and it always suffered from those, shall we say, vested interests within the insurance sector who didn't want to see that protocol working. There were lots of people who were against it. It's now being revised to link it. The standards of investigation, linking it to what is currently used for tree preservation orders in the planning system. So it's getting, you know, cross-departmental, not agreement, but it's the standards are the same, and that's what we're doing. I think what will happen is when the duty to consult is implemented, and local authorities have to actually consult with residents on the felling of healthy trees that are the subject of insurance claims, that will empower them to ask for better evidence. And that will mean that they'll be able to make more astute decisions in the future. Now, in regard to what you said about the England Tree Action Plan, I think that's there and it's being worked on at the moment. But with respect, can you just remind me of what you said about the question that Catherine West asked? It was that very last point that you made.
Yes, in fact, I was the resident who wrote.
Oh, it was to do. Sorry, it was to do with the guidance for the insurance sector.
Exactly. I said, so I asked, when is this duty to consult coming in?
We're working on that now. I'm helping DEFRA produce the guidance for that. We're going to be doing a small consultation on that once I've got sign off on the actual text of the guidance, and that will be going around to groups like TDAG and the Local Authority Tree Officers Associations, and that will be coming shortly. The intention is, I've been told, for that to be implemented by the Minister by the end of this year. That's what I've been told. Now, in answer to the question of why is, I think Minister Harrison has said that the government isn't intended to produce guidance. That's because we believe, the government believes, The guidance is already out there within the sector. What we are doing as a government is working with the sector to improve that guidance and make sure that it's relevant and actually does the job it's intended to do. That's what we've worked with people like John and Sue on the Institute of Structural Engineers guidance, and we're hoping to persuade the NHBC to update their guidance, chapter 4.2 on foundations. But the government has acknowledged that it doesn't want to interfere in the private business of the insurance sector. What we want to do is influence them to do the right things, but we won't produce our own. There's a difference between working with the private sector to produce guidance which is good for trees, and the government producing its own guidance in that, because it can't. What would we do if we did produce that guidance? We wouldn't be able to implement it. As you say, it's not mandatory.
Well, this is why legal changes are needed. I mean, at the moment, as you hear on the ground, the experience is really very different from the best advice that we're hearing in this workshop. There are threatening letters going out to people. There is inadequate evidence being used to ask for trees to be felled without proof that they're causing the damage. There is an extraordinary amount of tree loss simply due to
I think
councils panicking about.
I hear what you're saying, Dennis, and I agree with that. I've been in that position myself as a local authority tree officer, and that's one of the most depressing aspects of working as a local authority tree officer is dealing with what you've just said. But I think that the new duty to consult, because it specifically includes subsidence damage as something that should be consulted on, will strengthen local authorities' hand in making sure that they get the right evidence.
Can I ask Sarah to comment on the legal aspect of this?
Yeah, there's no easy answer, is there? And I think looking forward to the law, you know, when you think, right, what's going to happen if this case gets before a judge at trial and the judge is asked to decide, you know, should any money be paid by the local authority? Was the local authority's tree the cause of the damage? Is the evidence sufficient? You know, all of those points. I think the law of nuisance and negligence, which is the law which guides these cases, does at the moment provide the ability for these claims to go ahead. Not many of them get to trial. You know, I've got a booklet here of all the key case law, and there's not a significant number of them. And I'm yet to see a tree root subsidence case that's gone before a judge where the judgment actually talks in depth about, or at all, about the insurance process and whether that aligns with climate change. And that's the reason I've set up my business, because I'm absolutely passionate that day must be coming, but I can't promise that it is. In terms of, you know, nuisance and negligence law is quite archaic, and at the moment it needs to change and move with the times to be able to fit current situations. Like there's been a recent case which involved the Tate Gallery and the viewing platform, and there was a question about whether the law of nuisance and negligence should extend to actually protect people's rights from being overlooked and spied on from a viewing platform. Obviously, viewing platforms didn't exist when nuisance and negligence law started eons ago. And I think that's where we're at. We really need something to be before a judge and ask judges to start passing comment, because I think until judges are passing comment and there are written judgments which create law, there's going to be reluctance to change. If you look further earlier on in the process, when claims are being made and when insurers are instructing their loss adjusters to try and get trees removed. So that, you know, I don't think that gives an answer, but that's my.
No, thanks very much. I think Giovanna's got her hand up, and I think then we'll go to Sue for kind of some other questions. Giovanna.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Yeah, this is what we've been told all the time by our tree officers, by lawyers. You need to get case law. You need to get something on the books that other environmental lawyers can refer to. And this is exactly what we've been trying to do with this plane tree case, which, although has made some interesting points, unfortunately at this moment we don't know if we're going to get anything on the books. And that's what we need. More and more community groups are understanding that we need to get more cases where, you know, councils are being a bit braver, a bit more courageous. You know, these insurance companies are they earn billions a year. They're like the banks, you know. But yeah, it is true that we need more case law, and but that's why the law needs to change, I think, because until we get those new cases that set new precedents, it's going to be very, very challenging to kind of.
I agree. And also, like, let's not forget that there can be insurers on both sides here. So there are the home insurers, but there are often insurers that are working behind the scenes with the local authorities that are also acting to put pressure on the local authorities themselves, their own insurers. So you can have, you know, like both sets of insurers putting that same pressure on the local authorities. So it can be, you know, a two-pronged attack.
Yeah.
Okay. We could let this run, but Sue, I think there might be some other things. I don't know whether there's anything about whether there's anything about highway planting trees in streets or.
There's been a huge number of things. I will save the chat and analyze it a bit and put it on the website when we do the whole thing. But some things that came up that were really interesting, which I'm now quickly trying to find. Stuart Marshall, are you there? You made an interesting point about highways getting quite a long way down the line before they're even allowed to see what the proposals are. Are you there, Stuart?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Do you want to make that point yourself? That would be great.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Sue. And thanks for the presentation so far. It's been fantastic details. One of the comments I've got, I'm at a highway authority. It's a 3-tier authority. So the planning is done by the district or borough council. As a highway authority, we're a statutory consultee, but we only really see the highway. The landscape plans aren't a statutory consultation. They get done as part of the discharge or variation of conditions later on, where as a highway authority we're not included, but that often includes the trees going in the highway. Now, as a highway authority ourselves, we're looking to address that issue, but we can't force that. So how, if landscape's been put through at that sort of stage, how do the building designers, how do the architects know what trees are going to be there and then can put their foundations into the required depth? That surely is a problem there, where we're not seeing everything together, all the research, all the surveys, all the data put forward for the architect then to design and the developer then to build. And then, as has already been commented, the thin red line at local planning authorities is really thin and getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And that is a real problem, because I've had it from developers that, you know, the managers of site managers, developers will cut corners wherever they possibly can. So if you're not behind them checking that their foundations are to the right depth and the trees are planted correctly, I don't think you can guarantee anything will happen.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, my problem is chairing design review panels is actually getting the developers to bring their landscape architect to presentations, and actually for them to be appointed on day one, because they're so important in terms of the mitigating the effects of climate change. I mean, the better ones get it, but the smaller ones tend to not, you know, they haven't got the time to understand that unless it's properly organized for them.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, hi Stuart, I think that's a common problem, and it's the way that local authorities, as you said, in the way that they're structured there. But it's about, and I think TDAG have articulated this since it's been on board, that at that earliest planning stage, and you as consultees, the highway authorities consultees, you should get yourself involved with that as much as you possibly can. I know resources are tight, but what you need there is cabinet member support or councillor support to empower you as the local highway authority to get that information up front. And what my bugbear of those sorts of things is little green blobs on plans which don't specify which the trees are. They just say it's a sort of an aspiration to put them there. You need to get species and everything tied down tightly, and that's what the British Standard Tree Survey is all about. It's if you follow that, you should be able to do the tree survey, see what's there already. Sometimes you can use the existing trees to enforce foundation depths. That's what I used to do if there were trees that were being retained on a site, or if there was a tree in the street outside a site, you could get that sort of condition put into a planning application decision notice. But it's not easy. I agree, it's not easy, but hopefully, because we are all moving in the same direction and saying that this is the case, in the future, those decisions about what trees are going to be planted, what species they should inform what foundations are built. And at the moment, Sue will know this, at the moment planning stuff usually just does above ground stuff, but there are moves afoot to do underground utility. What was it, Sue? I forgot what it was called now.
The National Underground Design Guide, Design Code, to match the above ground design code.
in the future, that should be something that, and we've argued, TDAG have argued, and the FC has argued that on Manual for Streets consultation, that tree roots should have a right to be there, growing in the ground underneath, not just underneath footways and things like that, but in people's, on people's sites as well. That those roots should be accommodated by the structures that are being built, as John has mentioned earlier. So it's not easy, but I think we're slowly getting there, I think.
Can I jump in here? Is that all right?
Yeah, please do.
Jim, thank you so much. That's super important. Just a view from a couple of the large home builders that I've been chatting with. They go from one end of the spectrum of literally, one said to me when I was saying about ground conditions and understanding the soil, he said, Tim, it's all well and good, but we actually don't care. He said, NHBC basically means that we have 10 years where the houses don't have to have issues, and then it's not our problem. So I was a bit shocked, maybe not that he thought that, but that he actually said it. So there's that one view. And then another, perhaps a more recent trend is what I'm hearing from these builders is, look, we want to be more resilient. We want to build lower carbon houses, but we don't want to be first, right? And also it would cost 1 or 2% more, and that would ding into our profit margins, which I won't get past the CFO. And some of them are even going, actually what we need is regulation or laws effectively coming through telling us what we need to do, because then the whole industry moves and we aren't disadvantaged. So there are really good people in the building industry who want to bring change, and yet they're up against financial pressures of maintaining their profits, or a kind of actually we don't really care attitude pervading in this industry. So I would look, this isn't a place to kind of wax lyrical, but I would just love to see local councils empowered a bit more to be able to push back against developers and encourage good design and say, look, if you're going to build houses here are the things you need to do.
Yeah.
You need to spend £20 extra, £10 extra, and put a water butt in each house. It'll save water, it'll reduce flooding. You need to, use low carbon foundations so that trees can grow in close proximity to these houses. And if you need an analogy, which is, perhaps imperfect, but we look at designing earthquake resilient homes. You look at the Kobe earthquake in '95, half the town was destroyed where the houses were, not built to withstand an earthquake. Those fell down with huge loss of life. But what if we built tree resilient or climate resilient homes as the standard? We've done it for other hazards. I think we should probably do it here, and we'd probably see the costs, any additional costs, once those were legislated, of a lower carbon, more tree friendly foundation, the cost would come down to being, equivalent to pumping concrete into the soil, which is what we're currently doing.
This pressure is really great. It's a really good conversation. I think that the difficulty we've had, dare I say it, 13 years of deregulation and progressive cuts to local authorities whose resources are, almost on their knees. So I think it's very, very difficult. But I'm very encouraged by this conversation. Sue, you've got your hand up.
I got my hand. I can't ever do the yellow one. So one of the things that we're doing, I totally agree with you, Tim, but one of the things we're trying to do with Trees and Design Action Group is we're about to produce Section 2 of Trees Planning and Development. And that's got to focus on how to develop a tree strategy that delivers. And I think that if all local authorities had adopted tree strategies, that would provide that level playing field that would tell developers exactly what you expected of them. And so a lot of the arguments about viability and so on would go. They'd know what they had to do before they did any of their costing, any of their land purchasing and all those things, so that a lot of that discussion would go. But if we're all saying, which we are, and Robin and I said endlessly in the Edge with our colleagues there, planning is the key, then we actually have to invest in planning. So how do we actually make that change so that there's a proper investment in local authority planning so that it actually can deliver what planning should deliver? And then a lot of our problems would actually go.
Yeah, just to add to that, Sue's taken the words right out of my mouth. The tools are there for local authorities to do that through the local plans, currently through supplementary planning documents, but when the PPF is revised, they will be called supplementary plans, and they will have equal status with the local plan. There'll be a material consideration. So what local authorities need to do is to have a tree strategy, Sue just mentioned, and adopt it as a supplementary plan. Then all the developers who develop within their local geographical boundaries will have to follow that as a material consideration. It doesn't mean that they must do it, but they will have to have a material consideration of those plans in terms of foundation depths and things like that. And I was at the one of the developers, I think mentioned earlier, design conference, and the guy came up to me, head of their design team, came up to me, and he quite openly said that we don't look at any policies that the council have. We only look at what they've adopted as their part of their local plan or the supplementary planning documents, because those are the things that we can get challenged on an appeal, and the appeal inspector has to consider them as considerations. So if you want to up the ante, local authorities, if you want to up the ante, adopt your tree strategy and foundation depth guidance, etc., and tree species planting for that matter. Adopt that as your supplementary plan.
Okay, John, you had your hand up, which was John Patch. No?
I've got something for John if he has got his hand up.
Ask him the question and then he can.
Right. So one of the other things that came up, which I think is interesting because it's actually something that building designers can actually get their head around and do something about. So a question came up that you can have a lot of older buildings and they seem to coincide, really old, much older buildings who seem to live happily with trees and everything juggles along together. And then you get sort of newer methods of construction where you've perhaps put an extension on to a different building standard and use of mortar and so on than the existing building, and then the trouble starts. And then of course everybody says, oh well, if those trees weren't there it wouldn't be a problem, but it probably was the construction method. So actually, is this building regs recognizing what we need to do to be more kind of nature friendly in our buildings?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Sue, and I didn't realise I had my hand up, Robin, so I apologise. I'll deal with this question anyway. And it is an odd one because we seem to be quite happy to put a different foundation system in for an extension, irrespective of what the foundations were for the host building. And then we seem surprised when there's a crack between the two structures. I'm a great believer in that unless soil conditions have changed, then for an extension you put in the same foundation as you would for the host building. Now, that said, it is quite often the case that the area where the extension is going to go has been subjected to stormwater and there is a different regime acting, and so it is it's getting the balance again. I personally again would advocate mini piled foundations for extensions. Well, I would, wouldn't I, because I'm in the business, but nonetheless I would do that for a host of reasons, not the least of which the stability of the extension will be should be guaranteed, but there's less excavation, therefore there's less damage to tree roots that may be present. There's a better design that can accommodate tree roots, and at the end of the day you're going to have a better solution. So everything tends towards that sort of a process. But just going back to the subject matter of the actual day, we within the industry are quite happy to design and install underpinning systems on properties that have been affected by clay shrinkage and heave and exacerbated by the presence of trees. But clearly at the moment the cost benefit analysis between what is usually quite an expensive underpin and the removal of the tree is the issue, isn't it? So the what we talked about earlier, and indeed what we've talked about during the course of the development of the book, is the capability to accurately and credibly value the tree. And that really has to be the nub of the thing going forward. If that tree can be valued and that value can be recognized as being credible by insurers, then we're in a better place, and there's a better way of making the decision as to whether you underpin or whether you get rid of the tree or whatever. The horror stories of what I've just heard, and I didn't realize this was an issue, what I've just heard from the shift representatives, it is nonsense, because there are underpinning processes and subsidence repair processes that can be applied. So it comes down to valuing the tree itself. So we need to be able to do that, don't we? And maybe we're not getting that message across.
Okay, thanks, John, for that. Sue, I think we're probably nearing the end. Have you got a passing shot or two?
So my passing shot was Martin Dobson's been putting a lot in the chat about costs and things, so what I'm going to do with this chat is analyze it. And if we can answer any of those questions, we will. Seems to me that it would be absolutely great if Shift led on a kind of the community guidance document, so that you're not you're not bullshitted by anybody about tree removal, because I think the public need to understand a great deal more about what they can actually do. I think in the industry, as John keeps saying, we all know what to do, it's how to do it. And then we need to get the insurance companies to actually accept the valuation system, which is more than caveat, it's the whole sort of multiple benefits that these trees are delivering. And that's a sort of effort with the insurance companies. So we do our best with them. It's a kind of, on the insurers, it's watch that space. But I think, there's enough head of steam up now to try and actually say, you are the next port of call on this one.
So, Sue, you will be circulating the chat, will you?
Yeah, I'll do something with it, because it's probably.
And perhaps, Glenys, you could come back to Sue on what she's suggesting as to whether there's a way forward in which you can work together. So I think I hope that you've all found this useful afternoon. I found it really stimulating. I hope that TDAG will be able to build on this in their future work. It's so interesting that government and local authorities are trying to up their game, but actually delivering change on the ground is always really, really difficult. So it's going to require effort from everybody on this call and beyond. Thank you all very much for attending. Thank you, speakers, for speaking. It was a really great lineup and powered by having a community presence, which was great. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you all again.
And thank you, Robin, for chairing.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much.